Emma adjusted her black apron and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The grand ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers. The guests arrived in long dresses and tuxedos. Carrying expensive perfumes and quiet arrogance, she was just the helpful waitress meant to blend into the background. Carrying trays of wine and hors d'oeuvres with a smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. She had worked events like this for years. Ever since her father passed and her mother got sick, Emma had given up on college, given up on dreams. She had a gift. Though one she kept hidden, she used to play piano at night after her shift, in the quiet of the community center where no one could hear. She didn't need an audience, just the keys, the rhythm, the feeling of being alive. Tonight was just another event, another night of fake smiles, rich people, and aching feet. But something inside Emma stirred when she saw the piano. It stood in the corner of the ballroom, glossy black, untouched, forgotten. Her hands tingled just looking at it. She hadn't touched a real grand piano in years. The party was buzzing. Laughter bounced off the marble walls. A well-known pianist was supposed to perform. Someone who charged more for 1 hour than Emma made in a month. But rumors were circling among the staff he hadn't shown up. Some said he was sick. Others said he got the address wrong. The event organizer, a sharp woman in heels too high for comfort, was clearly panicking. Her voice clipped, her hands waving as she spoke to security and assistants. The guests were growing restless, eyes darting toward the piano. Wondering when the music would begin, Emma stood near the drinks table, balancing a silver tray, watching it all unfold. She bit her lip, her fingers itched to walk over, sit down, and play, but that would be crazy. She was a waitress, not entertainment. People like her weren't meant to be seen not like that. Then an older waiter named Carl, who had worked with Emma before, leaned in and whispered, "You can play, can't you?" She froze, looking up at him with wide eyes. "I've seen you at the community center." After closing, he continued with a small smile. "You're better than half the hired musicians I've seen here." Emma's heart pounded, her chest tightened. "They'd fire me," she whispered, "or worse." But Carl shook his head slowly. "The manager's desperate. If you play, maybe it saves the night. If you don't, this whole thing might fall apart." That thought made her pause. She looked at the piano again. It wasn't just an instrument, it was a piece of her soul. A voice she hadn't used in too long. She swallowed hard. The crowd didn't know her. They might laugh, or they might listen. Maybe, just maybe, they'd hear something real. The moment stretched. Her legs felt heavy, her throat dry. She glanced toward the event manager, who was now speaking urgently to the hotel staff. Then, as if her body moved before her mind could decide, Emma put down her tray. Carl took it from her with a nod. "Go," he said softly. "This might be your only chance." Emma walked slowly, every step heavy, the sound of her shoes on the polished floor echoing. The guests noticed. Their conversations softened. Their eyes turned toward her, confused. A few frowned, wondering why a waitress was heading toward the piano. Her hands trembled as she reached the bench. She smoothed her apron, then sat down gently. The ivory keys were cold under her fingertips. Her heart thudded like a drum. She could feel hundreds of eyes staring. A tightness squeezed her lungs, but then she closed her eyes and remembered. The first song she ever learned, her mother's favorite lullaby, the one she used to play while her father rested in his hospital bed. The melody that lived in her fingers, even when life went silent. She took a deep breath and pressed the first key. Emma's fingers pressed the first key, soft and unsure. A single note rang through the air. It was quiet but clear, sharp enough to turn every head. The room fell silent. The forks stopped moving. Conversations faded. And even the event manager paused mid-sentence. The second note followed, then another. She was playing the melody she remembered from her childhood. Her fingers shook a little. Her hands cold from nerves, but the music flowed, soft and slow, like a whisper trying to grow into a voice. At first, the guests looked confused. Some leaned closer. Squinting at her from across the room, they whispered to one another, "Isn't that the waitress who told her to play? What's happening?" The tension in the air was heavy. Like the calm before a storm, Emma could feel every pair of eyes watching her. She wanted to run. Her heart was beating too fast. Her breath shallow, but she kept playing, note after note, trying to focus only on the keys, not the people or the stairs or the panic rising inside her. She knew this song. She had played it 100 times before. But never like this. Never in front of strangers. Never in a room filled with the rich, the powerful, the cold eyes of people who saw her as nothing but a servant. The melody reached the first bridge, her fingers moving faster now. Her body relaxed just a little. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes, letting the music guide her, not fear. In the corner of the room, the event manager's mouth hung open. She looked at the hotel director, her face pale with a mix of shock and something like hope. "Who is she?" she whispered, but no one answered. They were all too focused on the girl at the piano. One guest, a man in a sharp gray suit, stood up and walked closer to get a better look. Others turned their heads to follow. The atmosphere was changing. People were no longer annoyed. They were curious. And something about the music was drawing them in. Emma began to feel it too. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was her shield, her language, her only way to be heard. Her fingers flew over the keys, not with perfect technique, but with raw emotion. Every note told a story. Every chord carried a memory. A woman near the front gasped, placing her hand over her heart. Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't know the song, but she felt it. It reminded her of something, maybe someone she lost, maybe a feeling she'd buried long ago. Emma's back was straight now, her eyes still closed. She had gone beyond the nerves, beyond the fear. Now it was just her and the piano, nothing else mattered, not the whispers, not the fancy chandeliers, not the expensive shoes walking around her. The music grew stronger, louder, reaching the room's high ceiling. Then it softened again, gentle and tender like a lullaby. Guests leaned in without realizing it, drawn closer by something they couldn't explain. Carl, the older waiter who had encouraged her, watched from the side with a proud smile. He had seen something in Emma that no one else had. And now, everyone else was seeing it too. The security guard by the entrance took out his phone and started recording. Even the bartenders stopped mixing drinks. Drawn to the quiet magic happening at the piano, Emma didn't notice any of it. She was lost in the music. Lost in the feeling she had missed for so long. She hadn't played for anyone in years. Not since her father passed, not since life had gotten so hard. But now, something inside her was waking up again. And then just when the music felt like it might carry the whole room into a dream, it happened. A single tear slid down Emma's cheek. She felt it, but didn't stop playing. She had remembered her mother's words, whispered to her on her last birthday, "Don't hide your light just because the world is too blind to see it." That memory filled her with warmth. Her fingers danced on the keys with new energy, new courage. The music wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was beautiful because it was real. And the room felt it. No one spoke, no one moved. The woman in charge, the rich guests, the staff, they all stood in complete silence. Some were emotional, others confused, but all were transfixed. The luxury event that had almost fallen apart had become something no one expected. A girl in a black apron, a waitress with tired eyes and a hidden soul, had brought the room to life with just her touch on the piano. Emma played on, unaware that every second was changing her life. She had no idea who was watching from the back. Of the room, no clue what offers would come later. For now, she was just a girl with a song in her heart, and finally, a place to let it out. The room was silent. Only the soft music from the piano filled the air. Emma's hands moved faster now, more sure of themselves. The shaky notes were gone, replaced with smooth, flowing sounds that seemed to float around the hall. She was no longer afraid. The fear that held her chest tight had melted into something stronger. She didn't care if they stared. She didn't care if they judged. Because right now, in this moment, she wasn't a waitress. She was a musician. More and more guests began to gather around the piano. Drawn by the strange sight of a staff girl performing with such emotion, some stood with drinks in their hands. Some sat down quietly, not even noticing their untouched food. Everyone was listening. Really listening. A boy, maybe 10 years old, tugged on his mother's sleeve and whispered, "She's better than the man who played last time." His mother nodded, eyes wide, tears threatening to fall. She didn't say anything because she couldn't. Even the hotel manager, who was known for being cold and strict, stood near the back, arms crossed but eyes locked on Emma's face. She had no makeup, no gown, no shining lights around her. Just raw talent, pure feeling, and a quiet strength that made people stop breathing for a moment. Then something strange happened. The same guests who earlier ignored her began pulling out their phones. A soft glow spread across the crowd as cameras recorded. The piano's voice echoed into their videos, and Emma's story was being captured. Without her even knowing, a woman in red silk whispered to her husband, "She's not just good, she's special." He didn't reply. He just watched with the look of someone seeing something important for the first time. Emma changed the melody, shifting into something upbeat and joyful. It was a song she wrote herself long ago, but never shared with anyone. Not even her mom. It was fast and full of energy, a celebration of small joys, the kind she used to dream of as a teenager when life felt too heavy. Her fingers moved like they had minds of their own. The sound turned brighter, and the room shifted again. People began smiling, nodding with the rhythm. Tension melted, eyes sparkled, and some even tapped their feet. She opened her eyes just once, just to look at the crowd. And what she saw made her heart stop. They weren't laughing, they weren't confused or angry. They were smiling. Some had hands on their hearts, some were filming, and others were whispering to each other, but not in mockery. They were amazed, truly amazed. Emma felt tears rise, but she blinked them away, not wanting to lose focus. She couldn't believe it. She had always played alone, always afraid that no one would care. But now this room, this world that once felt so far away, was clapping without even touching their hands together. A young woman near the front reached out and placed her phone gently on the table, choosing to stop recording and just live in the moment. That silent gesture meant more than applause. Back near the kitchen doors, Carl stood frozen, watching like a proud father. His eyes were wet, but he didn't wipe them. He just whispered, "I told you, girl. I told you they'd listen." Emma slowed the music, easing into a peaceful ending. The last few notes hung in the air like feathers, slowly falling to the ground, and then she stopped for a long, heavy second. No one moved, not even her. She sat there, fingers still over the keys, back straight, eyes closed, afraid to open them. Afraid it was all a dream. Then applause, not polite claps, not soft thank you pats. It was loud, powerful, rising like a wave, filling the room with praise and wonder. People stood, some even cheered. A few wiped their cheeks, realizing they had cried without meaning to. Emma opened her eyes slowly, blinking at the crowd. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She didn't need to speak. The music had already told her story. From somewhere in the crowd, a voice called out, "What's your name?" Emma froze. Her lips trembled. "Emma," she said softly, still unsure if she had the right to speak, but someone else shouted, "Emma," and others repeated it. Her name echoed through the ballroom. Her name once, just part of an apron tag, was now unforgettable. And in the far corner, a man in a dark suit stepped away from the wall. He wasn't clapping, he was watching, his eyes sharp, thoughtful. He pulled out a card from his pocket and started moving toward the front. Emma didn't know it yet, but her world had already started to change. All because she sat at a piano when no one expected her to. Emma stood up slowly from the piano bench. Her hands were still shaking, but her heart felt full. The sound of the crowd's clapping still rang in her ears. It didn't feel real. She looked around, unsure what to do next. She had only come to work, not to perform, not to be seen. A woman in a silver gown rushed forward, holding Emma's hand tightly. "That was magical," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Emma smiled softly, but didn't know how to answer. More guests approached her, praising her performance. Some asked for her name again. Some offered to buy her a drink. Others simply said, "Thank you." Emma felt overwhelmed. Her legs were tired. Her apron still on, and she wasn't used to so much attention. Just an hour ago, no one had looked at her. Now she was the center of the room. But in the middle of all the faces and voices, someone stood still, watching from the back. He was an older man with a neatly trimmed beard and a sharp suit. He didn't cheer or wave like the others, but his eyes were focused, thoughtful. When the crowd around Emma slowly parted, he stepped forward and handed her a small card. "My name is Richard Bell," he said with a calm voice. "I'm a talent scout for Northline Music Agency." Emma blinked, not sure she heard him right. "I don't mean to rush you," he added, "but you've got something special. I'd like to talk to you sometime soon." She looked at the card, then back at him. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice small. He nodded once. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." Before she could say anything more, the event manager approached with wide eyes and a flushed face. "Emma," she said in disbelief. "I had no idea. That was incredible. You saved the night." Emma smiled shyly. "I just didn't want it to be quiet." The manager laughed. "Well, you made it unforgettable." She looked around at the impressed guests, many of whom still stood in small groups, talking about Emma's performance. "If I had known you could do that, I'd have hired you as entertainment, not staff," she added half-jokingly. Emma nodded slowly, the moment still sinking in. She looked down at her hands. The same hands that had carried trays and wiped tables, now they had opened a door she thought was forever closed. As she turned to walk back toward the staff hallway, her co-workers were waiting for her. Carl clapped her on the back. Grinning wide, "I knew you had it in you," he said proudly. "Took you long enough to show the rest of the world." Another waitress, Sarah, hugged her tightly. "You were amazing," she whispered. "I had goosebumps the whole time." Emma's heart swelled with joy and a strange kind of relief. For years, she had kept her music hidden, afraid it wasn't good enough, afraid she wasn't good enough. But now, everything was changing. Back in the kitchen, the air was different. Even the cooks were asking about the performance. Someone had streamed a part of it live, and others were already talking about how quickly it was spreading online. Emma sat down on a crate in the corner, holding the business card in her hand. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was her mother, checking in as always. She didn't answer yet. She just stared at the card and thought about what just happened. She had played from her heart, not for fame or attention, but because she missed the sound, missed feeling alive, and somehow that honesty had reached people in a way she never expected. She remembered the woman in red who stopped filming just to listen, the little boy who smiled at her like she was, A hero, and the quiet man with the business card who saw more in her than just a girl in uniform. Emma knew things wouldn't be the same anymore. She didn't know what would come next, or if anything would come at all. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't scared of what the future held. She folded the card gently and placed it in her apron pocket. She looked up at Carl and smiled. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "You're welcome, but this was all you, kid." And deep in her heart, Emma believed him. Not because she played perfectly, but because she had dared to play it all. Emma sat quietly on the back steps behind the hotel, the cold night air brushing her skin. The luxury event was still going on inside, but her shift was over. Her hands were folded in her lap, still warm from the piano keys. She looked up at the night sky, wondering if everything that happened tonight was real. The music, the applause, the kind words, and the business card, all of it felt like a dream. She had come here just to work and serve drinks, not to change her life. As she sat there, she took out the card again. Richard Bell, talent scout. She had never met anyone in the music industry before. She didn't even know how these things worked. Was he really serious? Did he really want to help her? Before she could think more, the kitchen door creaked open. Carl stepped out, holding 2 cups of hot tea. He handed one to Emma without a word and sat beside her. "You okay?" he asked. Emma nodded, but she was clearly deep in thought. Carl smiled. "You know, I've worked here for 20 years, seen all kinds of people walk through that ballroom," he said. "But tonight, I saw something special. That room needed music. And you gave it heart." Emma looked down. "I just didn't want it to be silent." Carl chuckled. "It wasn't just music, Emma, it was you. They didn't just hear your notes, they felt your story." Emma didn't say anything for a moment, then softly whispered, "Do you think I really have a chance? That this moment could actually lead somewhere?" Carl looked at her. "Sometimes life opens a small door. You just have to be brave enough to walk through it." The next day, Emma called the number on the card. Her hands were shaking. As she waited for someone to answer, after a few rings, a voice picked up. "Richard Bell speaking." She introduced herself, unsure what to say, but he remembered her instantly. "The waitress with magic in her fingers," he said, smiling. Through the phone, he told her he had already received 3 calls from people at the event asking about her. One of them was a producer. Another ran a music foundation. Richard asked if she could meet him in his office that week. Emma agreed, though her voice trembled. After the call, she just sat in silence for a while. Her heart was pounding. She had never had a music teacher past high school. Never recorded anything. Never played outside of small local halls or the empty community center. She didn't have fancy clothes, a perfect resume, or professional training. But maybe that didn't matter. 3 days later, Emma stood outside the building where Richard's office was. She wore her best shirt, a little too big, and a pair of clean shoes. Her fingers nervously played with the ends of her sleeves as she walked inside. Richard welcomed her with a kind smile and warm handshake. His office had a large window, a few trophies, and a grand piano in the corner. He didn't waste time. He asked her to sit and play something, anything she felt like. Emma hesitated, but then she sat down, took a deep breath, and began playing one of her original songs, the same one from the event. When she finished, the room was quiet. Richard stood there, arms crossed, head nodding slowly. "You have something rare, Emma," he finally said. "You don't just play music, you tell stories. People will feel that, and that's what makes them remember." He explained he wanted to help her. He couldn't promise fame or fortune overnight, but he could guide her, help her find a mentor, get her into music circles, and maybe even arrange a few small performances. Emma's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, unable to speak. It was all too much, but in the best way possible. Before she left the office, Richard handed her a small folder. "Take this," he said. "It's a plan a start. Just don't stop playing." As Emma walked back home through the city streets, the sounds of traffic, chatter, and life all around her, she felt something inside shift. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just a waitress. She was Emma, the girl who played at a luxury event and made the crowd go quiet. The girl who sat at a piano and changed her life in one night. She smiled to herself for the first time in a long while and whispered under her breath, "This is just the beginning." The days that followed moved quickly. Emma's quiet world was no longer the same. Each morning she woke up with new messages on her phone. Some from strangers who had seen the video online, others from local musicians who wanted to connect. A few were offers, real ones, asking her to perform at small venues. She wasn't used to this. For most of her life, no one had paid attention to her talent. She had been told to keep her dreams small, to focus on work, to stay in her lane. But now that lane had opened wide, and it led to something she never thought possible. Richard kept his promise. He introduced Emma to a kind piano coach named Alina, who had worked with students preparing for competitions and performances. Alina was impressed the moment she heard Emma play. "You have the heart of a musician," she said. "We'll work on the technique, but never lose the soul. That's what makes you special." Emma started practicing daily at the music school Richard had arranged access to. The first time she entered the quiet room with a polished piano, so she cried, not because it was fancy, but because it felt like home. One evening, Alina asked her, "Have you ever played in front of a live audience, like in a real concert?" Emma shook her head. "Only that one time at the hotel." Alina smiled. "Good, because you're about to do it again." Emma blinked, confused. Alina handed her a small flyer. It was for a local showcase event an evening for rising talents. "To perform, you're ready," Alina said softly. "This is your moment to take a real step forward." Emma hesitated. "But what if I mess up? What if they don't like me?" Alina reached across the table and placed a gentle hand on hers. "Emma, music isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. And you already have that." The night of the showcase came. Fast, Emma stood backstage, her hands cold, her heart beating like a drum. The small theater was full of people, families, music lovers, and a few scouts who had heard whispers about the piano girl from the hotel video. She peeked through the curtain and saw rows of seats filled. It wasn't a luxury ballroom, but somehow this felt bigger, more important. This was a room full of people who came just to listen, not to eat or drink or make deals. Her name was called Next Up. Emma Clark. She took a deep breath, walked onto the stage, and sat at the piano. The lights were warm on her face. Her palms sweated slightly, but she wiped them quietly on her dress. Then she began to play. She chose a song she wrote the night after her father died, a soft, emotional melody, filled with sadness but also strength. Her fingers moved with care, every note falling like a soft raindrop on the room. The audience leaned in, silent and still. The theater echoed with her music. And something powerful passed through the crowd. They weren't just hearing a song, they were feeling her journey. Halfway through the performance, Emma saw a woman in the third row wiping tears. A man beside her nodded slowly with closed eyes. She kept going, stronger now, letting go of her fear, letting the music carry her. When the final note faded, a pause filled the air. Then, once again, applause. This time, it wasn't just surprise. It was respect, real and deep. People stood, some cheered, a few clapped with hands above their heads. Emma bowed slightly, tears in her eyes. Backstage, Alina hugged her tightly. "That," she whispered, "was your true beginning." Later that night, Richard handed her another card, this time from a producer of a small indie label. "He was here. He wants to meet you," Richard said. Emma smiled, overwhelmed but happy. She held the card like it was fragile. Her mind was racing, but in her, heart, there was calm. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she'd become famous or just play for small crowds, but she knew one thing. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a pianist, a performer, and now, finally, someone who believed in herself. Emma sat alone in her tiny apartment, the city lights glowing through her window. Her hands rested in her lap, and the silence around her was soft, peaceful. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. The night at the showcase had changed everything. Not because someone gave her a contract or made her rich, but because she finally saw what others had seen, that she was meant for something more. The next morning, Emma received a message from the indie label producer. His name was Marcus Hale, and he had been watching her quietly since the hotel video went viral. "I don't chase fame," he wrote. "I look for truth in music, and I see it in you." They arranged to meet at a quiet coffee shop downtown. When Emma arrived, she saw Marcus already seated, a notebook open beside him. He was older than she expected, with kind eyes and a gentle voice. "Emma," he said, with a warm smile, "you're different from the others. That's rare, and it's beautiful." Emma blushed, unsure how to respond. "I've never recorded anything before, or even sung with a mic. I don't even have good equipment." Marcus nodded. "I know, but you have something better: honesty. Emotion, that's what people are craving now. Not noise, not perfection, but something real." He offered to help her record a small EP, just a few songs to introduce her story to the world. Not in a big studio, but in a quiet space, raw and intimate. Emma agreed, though her nerves were loud. She had no idea how to be a recording artist, but she was ready to learn in the following weeks. She worked closely with Marcus and Alina. They helped her shape her songs, keeping them as close to her heart as possible. One was about her father, another about her mother's long nights, and one about the fear of being forgotten. Every lyric was hers. Every melody came from memories she never spoke aloud, and when she finally put on the headphones and stepped behind the mic, she wasn't acting. She was just sharing, like reading a diary out loud. When the first track was finished, Marcus uploaded it quietly to a music platform. No big launch, no fancy ads, just a soft post that said, "Emma Clark, real music for real souls." To their surprise, it didn't take long before people started listening, slowly at first, but then faster. Comments poured in. "I cried to this. This helped me through a hard night. Where has she been hiding all this time?" Emma sat in disbelief, reading messages from people in different countries. People she'd never met, but who somehow connected with her music. Her heart swelled with emotion. One night, she received an email that left her speechless. A national music magazine wanted to feature her story, the waitress who played at a luxury event and changed the room with a single song. She called her mother immediately. "Mom, they want to write about me, about everything." Her mom, still weak but recovering, laughed with joy through the phone. "I always knew you were something special," she said. "I just didn't know the world would finally see it too." Emma cried that night, not from sadness, but from something else: relief, joy, and a feeling that maybe she was never really alone. The magazine article was titled, "The Piano Girl Who Made the World Listen." It shared her journey, her pain, her dreams, and the moment she sat at the piano, not knowing what would come next. People all over the country read it, and many of them didn't just read, they listened. Her music started being shared in playlists, on radio shows, even in cafes and small bookstores. Not as background noise, but as something people stopped to feel. Emma still worked sometimes. She still wore her apron when she needed extra income. But now, people sometimes recognized her. "Aren't you the girl from that video?" they'd ask, and Emma would smile, not with shame, but pride. Because once, she was just a girl carrying glasses of water through loud ballrooms. But now, She carried something louder than noise. She carried a voice the world had finally heard. Months had passed since the night Emma played the piano at the luxury hotel. Her life had changed slowly but beautifully. She wasn't living in a fancy house or driving an expensive car. But something deeper had changed her heart, her confidence, her purpose. She was no longer afraid to take up space. No longer afraid to be seen every week. She received letters and messages from people around the world who had heard her music. Some were young girls like her, working hard and hiding their dreams. Others were older folks who said her songs reminded them of something they thought they had lost. Emma read each message with care, sometimes crying quietly. She never imagined that her story could touch so many people one day. She received an invitation from the same hotel where it all started. The manager asked if she would come back not as a waitress, but as the guest performer at their annual winter gala. Emma held the letter in her hand for a long time. Her fingers brushed the words over and over. She had walked through those halls so many times with a tray in her hands and her head down. Now they wanted her to return with her head high and her music ready. The night of the gala arrived, and the ballroom looked just as it did before: crystal chandeliers, golden lights, and finely dressed guests. But this time, Emma was not wearing black and carrying drinks. She wore a soft blue gown, simple but elegant, and her hair was gently curled as she stepped onto the stage. People whispered again, but not with doubt. This time, they whispered with excitement. "That's her, the girl from the video. She's even more beautiful in person. She's the one who made us cry that night." Emma sat down at the piano, the same one she had played months ago. Her hands touched the keys, and for a moment, everything fell quiet. She took a deep breath, smiled gently, and began to play. Her music filled the room not just with sound, but with feeling. Her fingers told a story of fear, courage, heartbreak, and hope. The audience listened in silence. Not one phone lifted, not one conversation whispered. Even the staff at the back of the room stood still. Watching halfway through the song, Emma spotted Carl near the door. Wearing his usual black vest and bootie, his eyes met hers, and he gave her a small nod. A proud smile on his face, Emma's heart warmed. She owed him so much. He had seen her when no one else did. After her final note rang out, the room stayed silent for a heartbeat longer. Then came the applause. Louder than before, stronger, more real. Guests stood, clapped, and some even wiped tears from their eyes. Emma stood and bowed, her eyes shining with emotion. Later that evening, the manager approached her with a big smile. "Emma, you didn't just perform, you gave us a night we'll never forget." Emma thanked her politely. But she knew in her heart this wasn't about impressing anyone anymore. It was about being true to herself, about choosing music over fear. Again and again, as she left the ballroom, she passed a young waitress standing by the wall. The same way she once had. Their eyes met, and the girl gave her a small smile. Emma paused, walked over, and gently placed her hand on the girl's shoulder. "Don't stop dreaming," Emma whispered. "Even if no one sees you yet, believe in your light." The girl nodded, her eyes wide and full of silent hope. Outside, the night was cold, but Emma felt warm. She looked up at the stars, her breath soft in the air. She had walked a long road from cleaning tables to taking bows on stage, from silence to song, and though there was still more ahead, one truth remained clear. All it had taken was one night, one chance, and one brave moment to sit at the piano when no one expected her to. And from that moment, a new life had begun.